Dudettes. Welcome to the podcast you've been waiting for. Great perspective and exclusive interviews.
It's a hard job for those guys because it's happening fast.
The kind of Saints insight and fun commentary you won't get anywhere else.
We've got plenty of technology to speed things up.
It's time to kick off your Been There, Done That Saints podcast, where we hand it off to our host, Mike Nabors, and Super Bowl winning linebacker, Scott Shanle.
Proud of these guys.
With the 14th pick in the 2018 NFL Draft, the New Orleans Saints select Marcus Davenport. Defensive end.
Welcome into your post-Easter pre-NFL Draft Been There, Done That podcast. I am Mike Nabors. Oh, yeah, that was the pick last year for the New Orleans Saints. Marcus Davenport, they moved from number 27 up to 14 and gave away the first-round pick in this year's draft. So we'll preview the draft and so much more with a longtime Saints beat writer, Larry Holder. And trust me, folks, we've had a lot of great guests on these podcasts. The best stories so far from Larry Holder, especially in our more likely segment. That's our last segment in the podcast where we offer 3 hypotheticals to each guest. I'm going to bring in my partner, Scott Shanle. Would you concur with me on Larry Holder?
Absolutely. This is no disrespect to Streif and Deuce and Colson and all those guys. But if we were doing this by draft picks, we would trade away the next year's first round pick to move up to grab Larry Holder because he was outstanding.
Justin Thomas, what did you think of Larry Holder?
Oh, man. I haven't laughed that hard in a while. His stories were great.
Larry Holder always sits in the front row of every Sean Payton press conference. And, you know, Larry Holder's been there from the beginning like myself. We've covered many of them. And his best stories surround Sean Payton. So please stick around for Larry Holder. He talks about the NFL draft, talks about growing up a frustrated New Orleans Saints fan. But before we get to our little segment before Larry Holder, guys, Easter has come and gone. You know, growing up, what was your favorite? You know, the Christmas tree ornaments, dyeing Easter eggs, or Halloween costumes? Shanle, what do you think?
I got to go with Christmas. I mean, anytime you get a reason to get presents, that's got to be the number one holiday as a kid. But great memories with Easter too. I mean, running around looking for Easter eggs, and then there's always those handful of eggs, 1 or 2 eggs that you can't find, and then you end up finding them years later. That was always fun too.
You know, I live in this neighborhood where every year I hear these kids start crying. It actually makes me miss my girls who are teenagers now because it's always a frustrating moment during that Easter egg hunt where a kid gets upset because they can't find the egg or they're fighting over eggs. But it's kind of, as a parent, you kind of miss those days. Justin Thomas, out of the 3, what was your favorite moment growing up?
How can you beat Christmas? I mean, you can't beat Christmas presents. That was the best.
I'm just a big Halloween guy. I always love Halloween parties. It was always an easy holiday. You know, you really don't have to do much shopping for it. So it was kind of a low maintenance holiday. But yeah, Christmas is definitely up there. Well, so was the NFL draft. And looking at the Saints this year, before we get into Larry Holder, and trust me, you want to stick around for Larry Holder. All right, Scott, they don't have a first-round pick, the New Orleans Saints. They don't have a third-round pick or a fourth-round pick. You know, we're not going to do any mock drafts because who knows what's going to happen in the 62nd overall pick with the Saints. But I think Sean Payton and Mickey Loomis are definitely going to think about moving up. It'll be interesting to see how aggressive they are in this draft.
Yeah, they're going to move around. They always move around. They find a way to maneuver, whether it's future picks and gain some more draft picks. And it's probably going to be middle round guys, which is fine. I mean, this team is very talented. Those middle round draft picks can come cheap contract wise, but build depth to your team. And that's really what this Saints team is all about at this point. They have great starters at almost every position. I would like to see them maybe add a little bit of depth throughout the offensive line. Losing Unger, Armstead's been banged up a lot. Pete is getting close to contract negotiation time. So you need to start to find those guys in the offensive line.
I think for the past few years, we were thinking maybe they're going to get that quarterback in the future, but with Bridgewater re-upping, you're not going to see a quarterback early on. At least I don't think so anyway. But Marcus Davenport, we played the draft pick sound at the top of the podcast. I don't have any problem with it. To me, Marcus Davenport kind of symbolizes the Saints' mindset. They're all in with Drew Brees right now and the young football team and the core that they have. I think Davenport was hurt last season, but he showed enough flashes for me that the potential is there.
He showed potential. He showed flashes. You can't teach 6'6", 6'7", and that burst that he has. Now, where people probably had an issue with that pick was he was kind of raw, played at a small school, so there's always draft potential or bust potential there. And I think what shocked a lot of people last year is everybody really expected the quarterback position to get drafted high. And when the Saints traded away a future first-round pick for a defensive end, it puts a lot of pressure on Marcus to have an outstanding career, a perennial all-pro type career, because if the Saints don't find that successor to Drew, Marcus is always going to be tied to that. So there's a lot of pressure on him.
All right, before we get to Larry Holder has so many great stories coming up. Let's talk about the schedule. The schedule was released. My biggest takeaway was, they get 4 primetime games. That's not a surprise. But one of them is not the Rams. I mean, I know it's an afternoon, kind of a lot of people will be watching that game. But was that the NFL saying, you know what, we don't want to spotlight a game that's going to spotlight all the mistakes we made a season ago?
I think that's exactly right, Mike. You hit it dead on the head, because a lot of people would be tuning into that game. If they would have put it on Monday night and had the entire nation watching it, they're going to replay that play over and over and over again. And the NFL wants to avoid as much negative press as they can. They put it still in a good time slot that a national audience will still watch it. But you put it on a night game, Monday Night Football, the NFL want to avoid that play being played over and over again because they know they blew it.
All right, without further ado, we bring in our guest. He has covered the entire Sean Payton, Drew Brees era, formerly with the Times-Picayune, now with The Athletic. And speaking of athleticism, he was a tremendous tennis player growing up, and back in our Greenbrier days, boy, he was great at throwing darts. Ladies and gentlemen, I bring in Larry Holder.
Man, we have like a studio audience and everything, even though we're not in a studio. We're in our own little abodes. But no, I appreciate you guys jumping on. I know you big guys been doing this for a few episodes. And I mean, I'm kind of bummed out it took this long to get me on. I blame Scott. Totally Scott's fault.
Yeah, I always consult with Shanle. He told me, you know what, we got to kind of get the audience warmed up, though. And once we have that peak audience, we bring in Larry Holder. That's kind of the deal, right, Shanle?
That's right. You make them want more, and then you bring in the closer.
That's right.
Well, if this is the last podcast and I'm the closer, that might be a bad deal.
You know what? A lot of what we do on here, we'll get to the draft, we'll get to the free agency, what's happened since the no-call nonsense and all that. But what we like to do is kind of capsulate this Payton Brees era, and I know it's not many left. We had Thomas Morstead on last week, but it's amazing the run New Orleans has seen with the head coach and the quarterback. Looking back, you and I were back in Millsaps with Shanle, way back in 2006. Would you ever have envisioned it still being around with those two? And here we are in 2019, Larry.
No, I wouldn't have. I mean, look, we walked into that 2006 training camp. It was just a total surreal environment. The fact that the Saints are coming back to New Orleans after Hurricane Katrina. They still can't get back into the city, and so they're having to stay in Millsaps extra longer. Look, Scott comes in, and he's traded to the Saints, and he has to show up to Millsaps, and then he's playing preseason games against his old team in Shreveport, and it was a disaster. And I remember after that game how much, and now that they retell it, when Sean Payton and Drew Brees retell it, they didn't know what the heck kind of team they had. So it's been an amazing run. We had question marks about Sean Payton. We had question marks around Drew Brees. Look, I think people were just enamored at that point in time with Reggie Bush, and we have been light years away from that. And I would have not pegged Drew Brees at that point to be a Hall of Fame quarterback and one of the best to ever play the game. And there have been ups and downs throughout the way, but look, it's the best era of Saints football we've ever seen with those two kind of in their respective positions.
Larry, you're a guy who grew up in New Orleans, and think about it. I mean, if you're in your mid-20s, there have been some ups and downs, but for the most part, it's been exciting offensive football for 13 years. I mean, if you're in your mid-20s, it's a whole different thing than Larry Holder back in the 90s, or even, before you started covering football.
I'm going back to when I was a kid. And look, I love Bobby Hebert now, but my God, I hated him. As a 7-year-old, 1987, once the Dome Patrol becomes the Dome Patrol, it's the first time they've ever been to the playoffs. And I blamed him for why the Saints couldn't get any further, couldn't win a playoff game under Jim Mora. I mean, they had this incredible defense. and the offense went nowhere. And as you grow older, when you see Bobby Hebert actually go to the run and shoot offense with June Jones, then you point the finger and say, Carl Smith, my God, you are an awful offensive coordinator. And it's funny, I ran into him the year the Seahawks won the Super Bowl, and he was Russell Wilson's quarterback coach. He still may be Russell Wilson's quarterback coach. And the fact that Russell Wilson is actually a productive quarterback with Carl Smith in there, just goes to show you. But yeah, look, we've seen where they're wearing the Bum Phillips and the bags on the heads, and you get through Jim Mora, Diddley Poo. Then you get to Mike Ditka, where I've got a great story a couple of years ago before Tom Benson passed. I had a chance to catch up with him for about 45 minutes. It's one of the funnier conversations I've ever had with anyone. And when the Ditka era started, and I'm going to do an awful Tom Benson impersonation, so bear with me here. He says, I went into the office, and all of a sudden, all I see back there is a bunch of whiskey and wine and beer. And I said, what the hell's going on? And this is right at the beginning of Ditka's era. And so he knew he made a mistake there. So, yeah, it was something that you've seen some ups and downs. And this is really – and we've like climbed back into it, kind of the golden era of Saints football.
The great thing about having you on, Larry, obviously you've seen a lot of Saints football, and I think those people who have followed the Saints for a long time can appreciate now more what Coach Payton and Drew are doing than anybody else. Give me, in the Sean Payton era, what was the most disappointing maybe time frame or a year relative to the expectations you can remember? And then what's been the most disappointing time or era that you've seen in Saints history since you've been watching them?
I'd say 2014 was the most disappointing year, simply because I felt like that the team had made some big-time moves. They were on the cusp. They had bounced back from the bounty year, 2013, probably played Seattle the best of anyone in that playoffs, and I assumed they would be on the cusp. And I went as far as to write in the Times-Picayune that it's the best overall roster I've seen in the Payton era and probably Saints history. And, of course, it went 7-9, 7-9, 7-9. And so I feel like 2014, as far as season-wise, that was more disappointing. And you started seeing kind of them chip away at some of the problem children that were in that era, as far as, say, a Junior Gillette, and they traded Akeem Hicks. And it was kind of that one blip in the radar. What really wasn't 2013. And so I feel like that was probably the most disappointing era. And then as far as the worst era, okay, let's see. I'm 39. I was born in 1980. I can remember watching, really, I didn't pay attention, honestly, till I was 7 when the Saints were actually winning in 1987. But I'd say probably the most disappointing era of it all, I'd have to say probably as the Dome Patrol kind of faded out and this thing started fading, and it just went into this lull, the end of Mora, into Ditka. You had a good season with Jim Haslett, but but then more just mediocrity. But I'd say that lull period when you feel like you had a really good opportunity with an incredible defense, and you really couldn't get anything done, couldn't even win a playoff game. And I know that's the era of Joe Montana and all of that, but still, they were heads up and could never really get anything accomplished more than just barely making the playoffs and bowing out.
Yeah, and a lot of people forget that they did have to play the 49ers twice a year, and that was Joe Montana, Jerry Rice. And I have to admit, I was a 49er fan. I grew up in Nebraska. I had to watch tons of Chiefs games. I became a Chiefs fan once Montana went there, but the Dome Patrol, they had to face an outstanding San Francisco team. And I was asking you that question, Larry, because Jim Henderson, we had him on, I think, our second podcast, and he said, without question, it was the Mike Dick era that was the most disappointing based on the expectations. He brought up Ricky Williams as well in that. Do you have any Ricky Williams stories that maybe you saw firsthand or were passed down to you?
Well, the one that's passed down to me, because he was drafted in 99. I was 19, so I was a
college
freshman, sophomore in college. So I'd come back down to New Orleans, and of course, illegal drinking was prevalent. You could walk in any bar and show some sort of you could breathe on the bouncer and say, hey, I'm 21. All right, get in. So the stories, I would just hear about how Ricky Williams used to hang out in the darkest of dark corners, because this place is a dark place. Snake and Jake's uptown. That would be his hangout. Wow. He would hang out in the corner there, and that would be it. And it's it's funny to see him at least mature, but he was not a mature guy when he came to New Orleans. That was obvious. And it's funny. I just saw, I think Peter King wrote it in his, I don't even know what his column's called anymore, in his Monday column about the Ricky Williams trade, because that happened 20 years ago, April 17th, when they traded the whole draft away. And so when he came to New Orleans and Ditka's there wearing the dreadlocks, and all of a sudden they put him in a wedding dress and he's on the cover of ESPN, the magazine. He was not ready for that. You could certainly tell. And there's a reason why the Saints went out a couple years later and drafted Deuce McAllister and then shipped him off on his own. And, they made one poor decision and actually at least made one incredibly great decision by going to get Deuce. But yeah, it was that era. You throw away the draft, you basically just threw away the team. In that one draft.
Yeah, that seems to be the consensus from a lot of Saints fans that I've talked to over the years. Was the disappointment, the hype around Ditka bringing in this legendary coach, trading away all those draft picks for one player. Obviously Ricky Williams had a heck of a college career, but it's tough to be the savior in the NFL. But the one guy who has been a savior is Drew Brees. You talked a little bit earlier about no one foresaw any of this coming in 2006. Do you remember your first impression of Drew Brees? The first time you saw him, maybe at Millsaps, or it was probably in New Orleans at minicamp. Do you remember your first impression of Drew Brees? Did you think he could be the guy to get the New Orleans Saints to a Super Bowl?
No, I just thought he was on a pitch count, and all eyes were on Reggie Bush. Let's be frank. All eyes were on Reggie Bush. We were all wondering if he was going to wear number 5, if the NFL was going to let him do that, not about Drew Brees. And he was even on a pitch count at Millsaps, and you're wondering, can this guy throw the football? It was kind of bringing me back to the memories, kind of old Saints memories back under Ditka, when the Saints drafted Danny Werfel. And I just remember him in college. Yeah, he made plays, but he made the football look like a shot put. He was struggling to get the ball down the field, and I was just wondering if Drew Brees was going to be able to do that. And, it didn't happen instantly. Look, you guys scrounged together a couple of wins, and then things started rolling. And obviously, Drew started feeling more like the person he was going to become. But I think my first impression was, I don't even know if this guy can get the ball down the field. And because you're coming off of an era where, look, Aaron Brooks, no one considered him this great quarterback, but he had a rocket arm. We knew that. And so going from one to the other, you're thinking, how is Drew even going to get the football over there? And it's almost like you underestimate his football acumen and his smarts and everything he's able to do before he even takes the snap on a particular play.
Larry, looking at this year's team, the offseason free agency, I think Mickey Loomis has waved his magic wand and created cap space and picked up some good names. But Mark Ingram not being in that locker room anymore, how's that going to impact this team?
I think it's going to be an impact, but I think people in the NFL understand it's the NFL. Not every team is going to be the same from year in to year out. I'm sure players like Cam Jordan, who's been with him every single step of the way, is going to miss him. I'm sure Alvin Kamara is certainly going to miss him. I think the offense is going to miss him. While I've heard a lot of good things about Latavius Murray, just through people who have covered him and just kind of through the combine and being at owners' meetings and talking to other people who know him, he's not an upgrade from Mark Ingram on the field.
Yeah.
So I think that certainly you're going to miss him there. And Latavius Murray, I don't think he's going to be able to totally take the place of Ingram in the locker room, even though I could tell you he is a huge locker room guy. This is such a little tidbit, but he's won the Media Good Guy Award. It means he's a professional. It means he knows what comes with the job, how to deal with being in the NFL for a number of years. And so, I think in that aspect, he's going to be fine and can be an asset in the locker room. But you lose someone like Mark Ingram, someone who's universally respected, I think is certainly something that is going to be missed in this locker room. And it's hard to quantify at this point really how much it's going to be missed, but we know it's going to be missed.
Yeah, I've talked to buddies up in Minneapolis. They said Latavius Murray is a great guy with the media, no doubt about it. Let's go to the NFL draft. I mean, we're used to all these mock drafts getting ready to go. You could throw the mock drafts out the window with the New Orleans Saints. I mean, as of right now, they don't have a first rounder. They don't have a third rounder. They don't have a fourth rounder. How do you see this draft? I don't see a guy like Sean Payton and Mickey Loomis kind of sitting still. I anticipate some movement. How about you?
Why even do a mock draft at this point?
Yeah.
It's worthless, completely worthless, unless you're saying, oh, well, I guess the Saints are going to trade Michael Thomas and get up into the first round. I mean, obviously, now that's what it would take. And we know that's not going to happen. I think the Saints are going to have to be extremely flexible with their draft. I would be surprised, and I wouldn't have thought this before free agency, but let's say a position like quarterback. Before free agency, if Teddy Bridgewater would have left, I would have said, all right, I bet you the Saints would be open to taking someone, say like Will Grier in round 2. But I don't see that. I think they feel like Teddy could be the guy going on later on down the line. Do they have some holes? Sure. I think slot receiver would certainly be a spot that they could target. And it's not like the receiving core in the draft is extremely top heavy, but it's a couple of first rounders, and there's a lot of guys, say, in day 2 that could be real candidates for them to kind of ponder. So I think slot receiver could be a spot. Look, they have not addressed a complement alongside of Marcus Davenport on the roster as far as depth to replace Alex Okafor. It's someone they could certainly look for that. But you got to be flexible here. You got to think, okay, if this guy doesn't play this year, does he play next year? That would open up offensive line, maybe the interior, because I'm not totally sold with Nick Easton as being the long-term replacement for Max Unger at center. We don't know what's going to happen with Andres Pete. We've seen some injuries along that offensive line. You could kind of go along the map, never pass on a good corner. So they've got to be flexible here. But we know Sean Payton, we know Mickey Loomis. They might try to spin a couple of picks, whether it's this year's 2 and 1 next year or something, to move up. So, and just talking with Jeff Ireland a couple weeks ago at LSU Pro Day, he loves it. He loves the aggressiveness, basically. So it's not wasting his time scouting and looking at prospects that are going to be higher in the draft.
Yeah, that's a great bring up, Larry. Is Jeff Ireland has kind of flown under the radar since he's gotten there. I think an outstanding job with the personnel side of things. You've seen that team kind of take shape since he's been there. They kind of revamped. You mentioned earlier your most disappointing year was 2014. I think the Saints were kind of stuck in trying to emulate the Seattle Seahawks, drafting big corners. Stanley Jean-Baptiste was big. What do you think of the 2019 schedule as far as the opponents the Saints are about to face and the difficulty that this team's going to face in that schedule?
Look, they're facing a first-place schedule, and I know they did last year, and they navigated it just fine. And so I do think that, though, you're going to Chicago. I think that, depending on what time of the year, that's going to be a challenge. I think you go to, you look at the Rams again and the Cowboys. I think that, obviously, those 3 teams, they won the division, so that's going to be a challenge. I think the NFC South is probably going to be a little bit tougher. I'd expect Atlanta to bounce back this year. Just getting Deion Jones back for an entire year on that defense, I think that's certainly a big plus for the Falcons. And I'm not even sleeping on the AFC South because I think Tennessee can be a viable opponent. I expect Jacksonville to be better with Nick Foles. Indianapolis is kind of getting their act together. Andrew Luck's healthy. So, their schedule is going to be pretty challenging. You got to go to Seattle. I mean, it doesn't matter if you're a better team than Seattle, if you got to go all the way up there, and Scott, you've seen that noise in that venue. It's certainly something that's a challenge. So I'm curious just to see how they navigate this thing, because we've seen slow starts a lot of times for the Saints go awry. We've seen them start slowly. Last in 2017, rebound. The Saints started almost as slowly. Last year, they lucked out to beat Cleveland. If Baker Mayfield plays, they're 0-2. I mean, and then they're trying to climb back again. So it's certainly you look at the teams on the schedule, and there aren't too many cupcakes on that schedule where you would see maybe last year, okay, you figure that one. I don't think there are a ton of cupcakes on this schedule.
All right, Larry, I know your time is precious. Let's go to our final segment where we're going to try to test your ad-lib skills. Justin? All right, more likely with Larry Holder. He has covered the entire Sean Payton, Drew Brees era. It's 3 hypothetical questions. Number 1, and our more likely, I'm going to take Zach Strief off the table. I'm going to take Roman Harper off the table. What has been your favorite interview of the Sean Payton, Drew Brees era?
I think it's when I asked Scott Shanle about what happened when he was suspended, like the first year he was here. I don't think he saw that one coming, right? No, I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding. Just kidding. No,
I thought you were going to go with when you asked Scott Shanle about his thoughts on Steve Spagnuolo in the 2012 season, which to me was the most disappointing season.
Do you understand, Scott? I guess this is statute of limitations.
Yes.
That you were my source for that story where people thought Jonathan Vilma included, cursed me out. Joe Vitt cursed me out. Sean Payton called out of suspension land to curse me out. And you were shaky. You were like, I'm going to tell him. I'm like, no, I'm going to take the bullets for you. And so I just broke journalism code 101. I just revealed my source.
Justin, bring back the applause. Bring it back.
I just revealed my source. And yet I think everyone.
Yeah, there we go.
I think everyone in Saints land realizes that Scott was my source.
I think it didn't take long for everybody to figure that out, Larry. You know what? I knew that was my last season playing. I just didn't want to ruffle the feathers of guys I had just went through the locker room with. And it was the only time I remained anonymous, but I didn't remain anonymous very long. I told all those guys, Vilman, all those guys, I said, guys, this guy was such a travesty to our season that I could not hold this in. And I had to let people know that Steve Spagnuolo is, to me, the biggest fraud coaching the NFL. It was so bad in 2012. You ask any veteran who sat in those meeting rooms, we still text each other, how the hell does this guy have a job in Kansas City? It was bad.
Well, Shanle, what was the fallout when you kind of let that loose to everybody?
They were disappointed. They were mad because I did the anonymous thing, and to Larry's credit, he took it for me. He got calls, as he said, from Coach Payton. But it was so bad, I had to let it out there. And maybe I can take some credit for why they fired the guy a year before his contract was up, because it was that bad. It needed to be known.
Well, this is exactly why we don't rehearse before the podcast, because we kind of have breaking news there. I love it. And Larry Holder gets applause twice, which is a first in this podcast.
I like it. I'll just put it to you this way. It was, of course, after the fact, everyone, of course, admitted what it was. But just go back to when Sean Payton came back. And obviously I was not in the meeting, so this is secondhand. But when Sean Payton came back and they had a meeting of all the coaching staff in Mobile, because he came back and he went straight to the Senior Bowl where everybody was. And again, secondhand, Steve Spagnuolo saying, Malcolm Jenkins can't play and Roman Harper can't play. And Sean Payton stopped the meeting and basically turned around and said, basically, you don't know what you're talking about, I'm sure, and more harsher words, and fired him in Mobile. Yep. So
I'm gonna confirm that story that Larry is telling. It's 100% accurate. That did happen. And that was the biggest problem we had with Steve, is he never took any responsibility for the junk defenses he called. It was always the player's fault. And when you stand in front of Coach Payton and tell him Malcolm Jenkins can't play and all these other all-pro talent guys can't play, that's when you get your apple in a roadmap and exit town, and that's what happened.
Wow. I almost called for a third applause there, but that's getting redundant. My next, it's funny. I usually, kind of prepare this stuff. The 3 and out, I was going to ask for the toughest interview of the Sean Payton era, but I think that may be Sean Payton. More likely, do you have a favorite Sean Payton story, Larry Holder, covering him for so long?
Oh my gosh. Okay. We were, this goes back to Mobile. Oh my God.
I was still hoping you'd tell this story.
Oh my gosh. All right. So here we go. So I'm sitting in the bar across the street. It's called Veets, a little hole in the wall bar. And my back's turned and I'm sitting with a media colleague and I just get slapped in the back like, wow. And I turn around. I'm like, who's this clown? And Sean walks up and he whispers to me, how do you like my defensive coordinator hire? And it was Greg Williams. And I was like, I just talked with Greg today. Great. And so Sean rolls up with Jerry Jones and John Fox and Mickey Loomis. And all of a sudden, it's like booze-a-thon. So, all right, let's go. So drinking this, that, and the other. Jerry, buy drinks. Come over, Larry. Let's meet Jerry. How you doing? Jerry Jones. Oh, I'm Larry Holder. I'm working for the Biloxi Sun-Herald. It's like a nowhere, whatever. Anyway, but so – I'm drinking we're having drinks, we're talking, and all of a sudden Jay Glazer pops in the bar, like headlocks Peyton, like tackles him, and he's like cursing Jay out, get out of here, and he wants to get away. So he says, Larry, let's go in the back and play some pool. So I said, all right. So me and Sean go in the back and play pool.
Wow.
And I said, all right, loser buys shots. Okay, loser buys shots. So I break, I knock 4 in, and I never see the table again. Sean runs the table, everything. Boom, 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 boom. And I said, you just hustled me. And he said, yeah, so go get me my shot. I'm like, all right. So I'm waiting at the bar, and he's getting antsy, like, Larry, where's my shot? I said, damn it, it's coming. So I get a SoCo and lime, and I tell the bartender, you make the worst shot you could possibly think of. And so I take the shot, and Sean, as soon as it hits Sean's lips, he starts going, it goes like, like almost like gagging. And I thought he was going to barf all over the bar. Instead, he runs to the back, throws up. I don't see him again for the rest of the night. I don't see him again the next morning. He skips Tuesday practices at the Senior Bowl, and then I see him Wednesday morning at practice, and I go slap him in the back and be like, hey, Sean, how's it going? And he's just like muttering under his breath, oh, my God, it's going better than yesterday. So I made Sean Payton miss Senior Bowl practice.
If this is your first time tuning in to the Been There, Done That podcast, this is the kind of content that you're going to get, ladies and gentlemen.
Mike, I don't even know what your third and final question is, but Larry is already the undisputed champion of what's more likely of all the podcasts.
Let me just throw in another side Sean Payton story. One time we were at Lucy's, which I know Scott has to know Lucy's, on Chapatulas, and it used to be this really small urinal there. Like it wasn't big enough for 2 people, but Sean was standing there. And there's this line of people. No one wanted to go pee next to Sean. So I skipped the line. I'm like, this is going to be great. So I go stand right next to him, and I'm like nuzzling like on his shoulder. And he like looks over me, and he's like, Larry Holder, what the F are you doing here? And I'm like, I'm challenging you to a sword fight, dude. Let's play some swords. And everybody's like, oh my God. Everybody in the bathroom's thinking it. And then Sean starts laughing, and so everybody like thinks it's like the funniest story ever. Like, but they thought I was like some psycho who's going to get killed. But I knew what I was doing.
You know what? Zach Strief is a leader in the clubhouse with the most downloads so far. Once everybody gets a hold of these stories, Larry Holder is going to eclipse Zach Strief. We have one more likely because Larry Holder's got to go. But I'm going to really test you here. Okay, you covered a lot of players in the Sean Payton, Drew Brees era. If you were stranded on an island and you had to pick one former player that you'd have to be with, and he'd help you with the survival skills, and it's kind of like a roommate, so to speak, which former player would you pick to be stranded on an island with?
Does it have to be a former player, or can it be a current player?
It can be either one, yes.
Stranded on a desert, and he's going to be really resourceful?
Yes, he's going to help. Or, it's just kind of a cool guy to hang with, too.
Well, cool guy to hang with and resourceful, that's 2 different animals.
Do you want to live or do you want to laugh on the island?
Yes, do you want to live or do you want to laugh?
You know what? I'm going to go the combo because I'm pretty sure Hollis Thomas can concoct a meal out of anything humanly possible, even though he might not be able to scale a tree. or do whatever, swim very far because he's kind of a mountain of a man. But I'll go with Hollis Thomas.
Hollis Thomas, Lucy's shots. Ladies and gentlemen, let's bring back the applause, Justin Thomas. Larry Holder just dominated, more likely. Unbelievable performance. You can find him on The Athletic. Always a great read. Always a different angle he brings to the table. But, Larry, I know you're a busy man this time of year. We really appreciate your time. That was a solid effort on your part.
Guys, this better not be my like swan song. Like you said, I'm not. Hopefully, I didn't kill this thing. Might get FCC banned or something for all I know.
That's the beauty of podcasts, my friend. It just doesn't matter. It's beautiful. That was great. I really enjoyed that.
Yeah, appreciate you guys, and you guys have done a great job, and I'm just honored to be a part of this. Good deal.
Larry Holder did not disappoint. At one point in time, the Saints head coach called him negative friggin', or a deviation of that, Larry. I think it's no filter, Larry. That's what the nickname should be moving forward, Shanle.
I love it. No filter Larry is right. And I think the listeners will get a kick out of Larry, some great insight. Anytime Larry speaks, it's definitely worth a listen. So we appreciate him taking the time out to be on here.
That's what we want this podcast to be about. Let it loose. Let it fly. Saints fans have heard a lot of these stories before, but we want new stories and new perspective. You know what? Sean Payton has a lot of layers to him. I've had some great conversations with him away from the press conferences. And deep down, if he heard the podcast, I think Sean Payton would appreciate some of that, Shanle, a little bit.
Oh, absolutely. I think there's a unique relationship between those two. Coach Payton kind of has that Bill Parcells in him where, he talks a certain way with the media, but on the side, I think him and Larry would be the kind of odd couple to sit down, have a drink, and laugh about a lot of things that happen at those press conferences.
I heard Megan Payton, Sean Payton's daughter, say one time that she was asked something that we wouldn't know about your father. And she said, she told a story about when I go to a restaurant with my dad, he talks to everybody. He's a real social guy. I almost have to pull him away. Dad, I want to have dinner with you. And you've seen that side of him, Shanle. I've seen that side of Sean Payton. A lot of people don't get to see that side of him.
Yeah, I think that's the part of Coach Payton that I really enjoy because, like I said, there's a lot of Bill Parcells in him when it comes to being a coach, but I think there's a balanced side to him off the field and away from the grind because the thing I appreciate about him is rarely do you see these quote-unquote players coaches have long-term success in the NFL because you have to have respect. And I love the way he coaches. I love the demeanor by which he approaches the guys, and the guys respect that about him. But I also love the fact that the guys who get to know him away from that persona still have respect for him when he's trying to grind the axe during the season. So there's multiple layers to Coach Payton that I think once you expose that, you have a whole new appreciation for him and his personality.
And I think that's the case for Payton and a lot of people in general in the public eye. They have to be a certain way, especially the way media is now, social media and all that. You got to be really careful because you could have a 30-minute press conference, but one little misstep and that's the headline. For sure. Well, before we go, we have a little bit more. It's time for our Lanyap. All right, Justin Thomas coming off a big Easter weekend. Any Lanyap for me this time around?
Yeah. One thing, this is probably about a week or maybe a little over a week old, but have y'all seen the video of Alvin Kamara practicing, or I should say training, where he's balancing on the ball and he's catching the little die. And the trainer will announce the color and he catches it on the color. I mean, a lot of people are saying I couldn't even balance on the ball without falling on my ass. How can this guy do it? I mean, it just goes to show his physical ability is amazing. His concentration, the guy is insane. And I thought that video was probably one of the most amazing things I've seen in a while.
Shanle and Fajita used to do that back in the day in the Saints weight room.
No chance. There's a reason why the guy, every time you watch him, you just say, gosh, it looks so easy. It doesn't look like he's running. He's a glider. He's got phenomenal core strength and balance. And he's so unique at the running back position. And seeing that video, I think it's great when those guys share those things for the fans to see. First of all, that you just don't show up on Sunday and it happens. You're putting in the work. So I thought it was a great video release.
All right, what about you, Mr. Shanle? A little lanyap for us?
Oh, Easter was great. I still have young kids, so they did the whole Easter egg hunt, and that was fun. This year, it wasn't a competition. We got smart. We did colored eggs for each one of them, so there's no competition because my daughter, she hates it when the two older brothers try to outdo her. So Easter was fantastic, but we touched on it a little bit. I'm gonna stick Saints related just because we haven't talked about it. It's a big deal. The Saints schedule release. The early part of the schedule is absolutely brutal, and I think the league was trying to bury this Saints team a little bit, but they are going to find out exactly what they have early on. Playing Houston, Rams, Seahawks, Cowboys. Tampa Bay is going to be improved, at Jacksonville, at Chicago. That is as tough as any team's going to face in the league, and it is going to be imperative to have a fast start, obviously, like we always say with this team, but it is going to be a brutal schedule, but we're going to find out just how far this team can go within the 6 to 7 weeks at the start of the season.
How about the Bucs schedule, though? They are away from Raymond James Stadium for the better part of a month and a half, and so are the Raiders. Now, to me, I hate to pile on the NFL, but you got a lot of smart people putting schedules together, a lot of smart people. How do you have a team away from their home stadium for a month and a half? That's brutal.
It is brutal. And then they come out and the next day and they say they regret that happened. Well, do something about it before you do it. That's what drives me crazy is they are so reactionary that you're in control of the schedule, guys.
Right.
Just develop a computer program that makes it fair as you can make it for everybody, and let that thing spit out a schedule or something. But it is ridiculous. I couldn't imagine being away from home playing a game for a month and a half.
I agree. My lane yap is a little bit, NFL draft, a little bit baseball. Baseball was always my favorite sport. I played it growing up. I loved it. I still love it. But on Easter weekend, after all the festivities kind of calmed down, I tried to watch the first Major League Baseball game of the year for me. It just made me miss football, guys. I love baseball, but my God, it took a long time. And then it went 13 innings. I got up after 11, and I didn't watch the whole game. I mean, I felt like maybe I have, my attention isn't what it used to be. But that coupled with missing football makes me not like baseball as much. And then part two of this, I love the NFL draft, okay? Now, a lot of it is just kind of BS, frankly. There's a lot of misses. There's a lot more misses than hits. But I love the drama. I love how everybody's mock draft is wrong. I love Mel Kiper. I love everything about it. I think a lot of people pick it apart and laugh at it, but I look forward to it every year. And it's just something that I really like. I don't know how you guys feel about it.
Yeah, I think the one thing I appreciate more about the draft is you're right. There's a lot of busts. So I don't look at the mock drafts. I don't look at who all the players they're pubbing up to be future Pro Bowlers and superstars. What I think is always interesting is what teams draft guys really high that nobody expected, because that creates drama. That creates friction a little bit in that organization as far as how's that veteran player going to handle it that has had that position. Those are the things that always interest me.
And there's no doubt winning football teams build in the draft. If anybody is testament to that, it's the New Orleans Saints the last couple of years.
Absolutely. They have proven the Saints, for a few years there, 14, 15, they were trying to sign one or two big name guys in free agency, and it just didn't work out, whether they got hurt, didn't fit in the locker room. You have to build through the draft. And as 06 proved, when you had Marcus Colston, Jari Evans, and you had Roman Harper, those guys produce. You have to get them young so that you can show them what culture you want them to partake in. Because when you sign free agents who have been in the league for a few years, you never know what type of personality you're going to get.
And to bring it full circle, I think that's true in a lot of sports. I mean, for years, a lot of baseball teams would try to spend a lot of money, and it just wouldn't work. Then they started drafting better and making trades and developing their farm systems. You see the Houston Astros, frankly, you see the Tampa Bay Rays. A lot of these teams that aren't the New York Yankees or Boston Red Sox, the reason they can compete is because they draft well and they don't spend a lot of money. So that's kind of a good formula all around. Well, listen, for Scott Shanle, for our producer, Justin Thomas, and for No Filter, Larry Holder, unbelievable guest. We have to have him back soon. Really check out our podcast. We're on a lot of platforms. We're on Podbean, we're on iTunes, we're on Google Podcasts, Stitcher, and Spotify. We're growing every week, and we have great guests for you every week as well. Until next time, I'm Mike Nabors. We'll see you next week.